morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in here. We're going to talk about interviewing for doctoral programs in counseling psychology. And this is another webinar hosted by Student Affiliates of 17, or SAS. So this is kind of a follow-up to a webinar we had in November that was talking about the application process for counseling psychology doctoral programs. And we thought that it would be nice to have another time to talk about specifically the interview process, because there can be a lot that goes into it. So we have some awesome presenters today. We have Siwin, I'm Colleen Eddy. We have Letitia, Gloria, and Sandra, who will be facilitating our Q&A. So in a little bit, we'll each introduce ourselves and tell you a little bit about our backgrounds. But first, I'm just gonna briefly mention the organization that we're a part of. So APA Division 17 Counseling Psychology is the division that we're associated with, and so Student Affiliates of 17 is the student group with the Counseling Psychology Division. And it is our professional home for counseling psychology students, those interested in counseling psychology, and professionals as well. And so we're really committed to a holistic psychological perspective. We focus on strengths, contextual awareness, multiculturalism, social justice, and we integrate a lot of vocational and developmental lifespan issues as well. So this is our division. If you want to learn more about it, we have the website listed there. And then specifically Student Affiliates of 17, SAS. It's a great student organization, a lot of networking opportunities, a chance to meet people who are interested in similar things if you have your home in counseling psychology, or even if you don't. We have some conferences coming up soon. The Counseling Psychology Conference happens only every few years. I think it's like 6 or 7 years, and this is happening this April in New Orleans. And then every year at the APA convention, we have Division 17 programming and student-specific programming as well. There's some great benefits for joining. We have some travel awards. One thing we have coming up very soon is Counseling Psychology Conference. There's some funding opportunities to waive the registration fee. There is also a funding to host events on your campus related to counseling psychology, a lot of different leadership positions and ways to get connected with other students through the division. And so if you're interested in joining, if you become a student affiliate of Division 17, then you are automatically a member of SAS. It costs $17 to become a member of Division 17. So there's the website there if you'd like to find out some more information about joining, or if you'd like to contact us if you have any questions. We'd be happy to talk to you more about SAS. Okay. So the brief overview of the presentation, like I said, we're gonna introduce ourselves. We're gonna talk about the purpose of the interview process and preparing for interview day. We're going to give you some of tips from our experience, and people are going to kind of share a little bit. We're going to talk about what to expect during the interview day and give you some good questions to ask faculty and students so that you can get all the information that you need as part of the interview process. Talk about tips for calming nerves. I definitely needed that during interviews, and we'll talk about what to do after you have an interview. And then we will have a Q&A at the end, and part of that will be recorded, but then we will have a debrief that won't be recorded afterwards. So like I said, yes, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask questions. You can ask them through Zoom there, and then we'll have a debrief at the end. We are currently recording so that others can watch this afterwards if they couldn't make this time. But the debrief will be a time when we're not recording. We will let you know when we switch to that time. We really appreciate any questions that you have and hope to answer them and give you some perspectives on them. And we'll go over some information first and then start the Q&A.
Okay, so maybe we can all take a second to introduce ourselves here. I'll start us off. First of all, I just want to say thanks again for everybody who is tuning in. We hope this will be a helpful resource. My name is Gloria McGillen. I am one of the co-chairs of SAS. I am a third-year doctoral student in counseling psychology at the University of Missouri. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm looking forward to sharing more about previous interview experiences today.
I'm Letitia Martinez. I am also a third-year doctoral student in the counseling psychology program at the University of Missouri. My pronouns are she, her. I am also one of the co-chairs of the Student Affiliate 17. And the training I had at the time I was applying, I had my bachelor's degree, and then I took some time off from school. So I took about 4 years off when I worked in a research lab. I was a research assistant, lab manager. Yeah, and that's me.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Siwan Louder. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm currently a first year in the Counseling Psychology PhD program at the University of Miami. As far as training I had beforehand, after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I did a bunch of different things. But then I ended up going to get my master's degree at Teachers College at Columbia University, and then getting into this PhD program. And I'm looking forward to passing forward the tips that I got for my interview days and passing it on to people who watch this webinar.
And Sandra?
Hi, so I'm Sandra. I'm currently a master's student at University of Missouri, and also currently going through the interview process myself.
Great, thanks for sharing, everybody.
Hi, I'm Colleen Eddy. I was talking earlier, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm at the University of Missouri as well. I'm in my 5th year here. I am currently interviewing for internship programs, so I know the interview process is not a fun one, but we'll get through it. So the training I had when I was applying, I applied with a master's and research or clinical interest right now. I like working with youth mental health, and I like working with mental health in schools.
Great. Now we're gonna take a second to learn a little bit more about all of you. So on the next slide, you're gonna see a couple of questions, and we're gonna launch a poll now so that you can respond to these. We ask these in part because we'd love to tailor what we're gonna share today to what everyone is up to and what you might need. So the first question on the poll, which is launching now, is just about where you're at in the process. Are you currently completing interviews, or are you tuning in today to prep for a future cycle? And then secondly, if you are interviewing, what format are you looking at? In-person interviews, online, or a combination? So we'll give give a minute here, allow people to respond. And then when it looks like most people have had a chance to respond or responses aren't coming in anymore, we'll pause this and share. Other presenters on the call, are you able to see these results, or would it be best if I just kind of read them out?
If you could read them, that would be great.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like almost everybody has responded. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So on the first question, and I'll share the results here. So are you planning ahead? Are you currently completing? It looks like majority of you are in the process, so we're thinking of you. And to those of you who are planning ahead, kudos. I think one of the most important elements in terms of a successful interview season is planning ahead, and that can be a multi-year process. Those of you who are interviewing, it looks like about half of you are just doing in-person interviews. One person is just interviewing online, and then about half of you also have a mix. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. And again, as we mentioned as the webinar was getting started, there is a live Q&A function on this webinar. So if things particular to your experience are coming up that you have questions about, please send those in. If we don't address them immediately as we're presenting, we'll have a chance to get to those at the end of the discussion during the Q&A. Okay. So I think we can move ahead here and advance on to purpose of the interview process. So if you've reached the interview process, it's really important to know that you're qualified. This stage of the overall application season is not focused as tightly on establishing your academic and professional qualifications for beginning doctoral studies in counseling psychology or any other field that you might be looking at, but is a little bit more fine-grained and really is focused on the fit between you, your goals, your skills, and interests, and those of both the overall program that you're interviewing with, and if you're applying to a doctoral program that uses a kind of mentorship or advising model, the advisor that you're focused on. There is a pretty well-known guide that we recommended on the last webinar, Mitch's Uncensored Advice for Applying to Graduate School in Clinical Psychology. We have a link to that guide again at the end of this presentation. There's a whole chapter on interviewing, and one of the first points that he makes in that section is exactly this, that the interview process is very mutual. So it's not really about at this stage establishing that that you're sort of basically qualified for the field, but more so that you want to be where you're interviewing, and that is a question that is both being considered on the side of faculty and other students who might be involved in the interview process, who are students in the program that you're interviewing with, as well as should be one in your mind that you're trying to answer over the course of your opportunity to speak with people in that program. And for that reason, coming armed with thoughtful questions and questions that are important to you is really central to, I think, demonstrating yourself as a competitive candidate at this stage of the process, as well as getting the information that you need. And further in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about what makes a good question. So moving ahead to the next slide, preparing for interview day. So in order to get ready, there's just sort of a couple of key steps to focus on. The first will help you in this task of preparing good questions. To prepare good questions, you really need to sort of have a detailed sense of what might differentiate the program that you are looking at from other programs, how it talks about itself, how faculty you might be interviewing with are thinking about their current line of professional practice or research. So looking at materials that can give you a fresh sense of all that after it's probably been, right, a couple of months or a few weeks since you have looked in detail at any particular program will be valuable. So things to target: the program statement on the website, the program handbook. Usually there's going to be recent editions of that just available on the program website. Your faculty, your possible advisors, both their professional page, whether that's on the departmental website or it's an independent page, as well as, and I mentioned this in our previous webinar, but Google Scholar is a very helpful resource for getting a sense of what faculty are up to recently. You can typically go in and order faculty publications by their recency. So that I would recommend that if you are looking at faculty who are more research focused or who are clinically focused but are publishing clinical scholarship. That's often going to be more up to date than faculty members' websites, and a way to get a sense of, if I worked with this person, what might we be working on now or kind of wrapping up from the recent future. Once you've collected all these materials and kind of refreshed your memory, also look back at what you've shared with the program so far. Faculty members will have recently read your statement of purpose. It can also be helpful to look back at your CV. This can help you anticipate things that you might get questions about or things that faculty may have noticed that they're just excited to talk more about with you. Faculty really want to get a sense of you as an overall person and what you're passionate about professionally, and the statement is a really important demonstration of that they'll be referencing. So with that already at hand, do start working on potential questions, both generally that you'd want to ask any program, as well as some particular to each program to show that you've made an effort to get to know them, in detail. And since the majority of people do interview in person, the final task to think about from the earliest stages is your travel. Both the financial aspect of that, which we addressed a little bit last time, but as the interview is getting closer, just the practical logistics of it. Interviews are happening from late January into early to mid-March. This is obviously not a time of great weather throughout most parts of the US. And even if you are in a part of the country or coming into a part of the country that typically has nicer weather, if you're flying, there can be delays with planes coming in from other areas. So it's not uncommon for interview applicants to hit travel delays. Think ahead about how you might get in touch with different programs if that happens, and just know that it's not unprecedented, and if you're communicating readily with programs, it's not going to be held against you, and there are other ways to accommodate you if you do get delayed. Okay, so those are kind of initial pieces of advice. So we're gonna now switch gears a little bit and see when it's gonna talk about some of the particularities with preparing for online interviews.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. Okay, so for online interviews, there are certain things you got to think about that people who have in-person interviews don't have to think about. First and foremost, a secure internet connection. You have to be in a place where you know your Wi-Fi isn't going to be spotty at the best, because like I said, a lot of these interviews they like to do in person because they want your full attention. But for a lot of reasons, like for example, like I had a friend who one of her schools was in Hawaii. Flights to Hawaii are crazy expensive. So he did all of his interviews over the internet or online. So making sure you have a secure internet connection. I'm paranoid, so I would probably recommend even having, like, in addition to Wi-Fi, also having an Ethernet cable nearby, because, you know, just in case. Next point is to make sure that your phone is on silent. I know this is kind of like, of course, in person, like you remember to do this, but being, you know, having that online interview, it's kind of nice, like having it right off screen or having the notifications come up on your computer screen. And basically, the people who are interviewing you can see when your eyes shift to look at a new email notification or shift because the light on your phone like flashed. So I would recommend just keeping it just out of sight, out of mind. I know my laptop has a function where I can make it so no notifications pop up and make it so that way you're 100% present with the person who's interviewing you. Additionally, find a quiet spot. So for a lot of people, that might be their home. At the time when I was doing interviews, I was living in New York City, and across the street there was construction and they were very loud. Usually they would wake me up at 7 a.m. and they would go until about 5. It's wonderful. So being at home was not the best spot for me to hold an interview. So finding a quiet spot, I know a lot of time libraries have rooms that you can reserve. So you can reserve it for like a little, or like maybe 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after your interview, get things really set up, look really nice. And so that way you have minimal interruptions when you're having that interview with the interviewer. And additionally, everything that Gloria said previously still applies here. Do your homework, look for different questions. If you know exactly who you're going to interview, try to find a kind of tailor your questions to who you're going to be talking about. So for example, if the director of the program is going to be one of the people that you interview with, maybe asking specifically about what student outcomes have been, graduates of the program, what have they gone on to do? And especially if you have a very clear vision in mind for what you want to do once you get your PhD, whether it's practice exclusively, do research exclusively, be a professor, be a clinician, like it, you know, just asking the questions like that, versus if it's your advisor that you're going to be interviewing with, asking specific questions that only your advisor can answer. Like, where do you see, what direction do you see your lab going in the next 5 years? Like how do you see my work contributing to your lab in that way? And then on top of that, express gratitude. Let me say, like, a lot of these programs prefer to have you there in person. So if they're offering an online, if they're offering an online alternative and it's a lot cheaper, you don't have to travel as much. Technically, you only have to wear like a professional attire on the top half. You could wear sweatpants on the bottom half. Just express gratitude. Say, thank you so much for your flexibility. Thank you so much for interviewing with me. And just be available to contact. So like if they need to do additional interviews, like if other people want to meet you, if they want to do a follow-up phone call, don't forget to send the thank you notes again. Just express gratitude at their flexibility, and be sure to like kind of let them know how you're feeling, and let them know that you're really thankful that they still, you know, are giving you this opportunity through online interviewing.
Yeah, and just like an in-person interview with online interviews, there are going to be a variety of formats that may include exactly what Siwan is mentioning, that it's possible you're going to speak to multiple people. For instance, it's not uncommon to have one set of calls with faculty and another set with students. So in preparing your space, planning your logistics for online interviews, do factor in that you might be making multiple calls.
Thank you so much. And then we'll go on to the next slide about what to expect the actual interview day. So the thing about interview days is that each program very much has their own way of doing things, because like eventually, like over the course of this day, these professors, these students, they have to figure out whether you'd be a good fit for their program, and you have to figure out the same thing about them. So each program has kind of fine-tuned a way to figure that out. So I tried to pick broad areas of what to expect during interview day. So one aspect of that is to have a program overview. So usually during this time, they'll provide information about funding. What I found is schools that have more funding are more likely to share that. Schools that have less funding are less likely to share about funding. So they'll have that type of information. You'll also, it'll also most likely include a campus tour or a tour of the facilities that you'll be using. So that means for everyone, make sure you wear comfortable footwear. So for example, if you're going to be wearing heels, just make sure that you don't complain if you're walking across campus, for example, for that. And then usually it'll include a tour of the counseling center as well, where you'll be doing things like your practicum and where you'll be seeing clients. They just want to say like, this is where you'll be, this is what you'll be doing. They'll also usually give like general overview of like what the professors do, what the faculty do, what they're expecting from, or what they are doing, what makes their program unique, because just like that quote earlier in the presentation showed, you are interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. You're trying to figure out if it's a good fit. Next is the actual interview, and in parentheses there's an S, because more than likely more than one person is going to be interviewing, because they want to get a consensus of who you are as a person. So one aspect of this could be the group interview. So where they sit you all in a room, or maybe at least more than just one-on-one, you're there with other prospective students and they ask you questions, whether they're about your expertise, or they could very easily be, I've heard some like they put out like a scenario of some sort, and they want to just see the way that you think, see the way that you interact with other people and things like that. So when we get to the tips for calming your nerves, that's going to be very important, because you want to be at your best at those times. And because they just want to see, because they know that you're going to be doing the things that we've said in the interview. You're going to be reading over your CV. You're going to be reading over your statement of purpose. You're going to have done your research on them. You're going to come prepared with questions, because you wouldn't have made it to this stage if you weren't a prepared person. So they want to kind of throw you off your game. Some programs want to throw you off your game a little bit, or see how you think on your toes. That's the main thing. There are also the individual interviews, and those can happen with faculty, students, or both. And those are more one-on-one. That's when you kind of get to use your questions that you have tailored for each individual. I know for I had two interviews with two schools, excuse me. And one of the schools, they told me ahead of time who I'd be interviewing with. So I was able to look up those person's expertise and be like, okay, like what kind of questions can I ask them? And the other school did not. It was very much on the fly. So I had to kind of like stick with the general questions about the program in general and ask their experience of like what their mentorship styles are, or different things like that. And then for some people, it's a combination. Like I said, it is a full interview day. Each program has their own way of trying to figure out which students are the best fit for their program. So you might have some individual interviews with like the person who you're applying for them to be your research advisor, or like with other faculty. And then you might also have a group interview to see how you think on your toes, how you interact with other people. One thing I would say that's important to mention is that the second you step on campus was when the interview begins. So don't be kind to everyone, students and faculty. I heard a horror story recently about how there's some prospective students who would be very nice and engaging and personable to the advisor that they wanted to work with. And then to all the other faculty and students, they were being very dismissive and very condescending. So just don't be that person. Right. And then usually with these interview days, there is some sort of social, whether between current and prospective students. Sometimes there are, how you say, the night before, sometimes they're the day of, sometimes faculty are included, sometimes they're not, sometimes alcohol is included and sometimes it's not. So those things are very flexible. This is another opportunity where your research can really shine through. So for some labs, they have pictures of the students that are with each research advisor in the lab. So if you can like match, you know, faculty or advisor to the students and then spot those people in the social, then you can just make sure like, hey, I want to spend a lot of time speaking with you because you're in the lab that I would like to be in. And as far as if there is alcohol included at these events, usually what I've heard is usually 1 drink is okay, or like 2 at the max. I would say if you don't want to, then don't. No one's forcing you to drink anything. They just wanted to apply it as an option. But then on the other hand, don't overdo it. Copious amounts of alcohol makes nothing better in an interview situation, especially when you're nervous. So just be careful. And yeah, is there anything anyone else wanted to share about their interview days?
I just wanted to mention one thing that came up during one interview that caught me off guard a little bit was one place did have a writing sample. Actually, they were going to have it, and then there was a snow day, and they didn't have it, but that was kind of unique. And so just wanted to put that out there that could be part of an interview day. I think the prompt was pretty general, just asking, I think, about something that maybe influenced me recently, but just to put it out there as something that could come up, because that kind of caught me off guard when I was interviewing in the process.
Yeah, I also encountered a writing prompt on one interview, but in the overall sort of number, it was just that one. So they are fairly rare. If you have any kind of writing anxiety, practicing a time writing may be valuable, but the likelihood that you are going to encounter one of these is fairly low. Around the socials, I'll share from our approach here at Mizzou. They do tend to be well attended, and it's not uncommon to see a lot of students involved in interview day. And we might touch on this a little bit more on the slide on calming nerves, but that's because interview applicants are important to people in the program. You are our potential future colleagues, and do know that people are excited that you're there and really excited to meet you and want you to have a comfortable experience. And so people do tend to turn out at these events.
Right, thank you so much. Like I said, like each program has different focuses or different ways that they go about trying to figure out if you're the best fit. So it was really nice hearing other people's experiences with interview day, and maybe everything that we said here will apply. Maybe something new will, pop up, like a particular program has a particular way of doing things. What's going to be most important is keeping yourself calm, staying on your toes, and being able to show them how brilliant you are, because you wouldn't be there if you weren't. So next slide, please.
All right, so I will be talking to you a little bit about good questions to ask faculty and students. So just to kind of echo what Gloria had mentioned earlier, interviews are really an opportunity for prospective students to evaluate the program fit just as much as they're interviewing you. It's an opportunity for you to kind of interview the program, interview faculty, interview students, and find out whether this program is a good fit for you. It's a big decision to move your life, to move, your partner, potentially families, for several years. And so asking good questions will really give you a sense of what your life will look like over the next 4, 5, 6 years. It's important to get a sense of whether this is going to be a place in a program that you're going to be comfortable in. So starting off with some good questions to ask faculty. So getting a good sense of sort of what's your day-to-day going to look like? What opportunities are available for your training in that particular program? So you might want to ask about clinical opportunities that are available. What clinical sites are available for practicum? So some places might have a clinic within their program where students get trained. They might get live supervision. Other programs don't offer that. So if that's something you're looking for, it's important to kind of get a sense of what your clinical training is going to look like. Will there be opportunities for group therapy, for individual therapy? What does that kind of look like? How many clients will you be seeing every week at different sites? Those kinds of things. Are there opportunities for assessment experience? Things like that. In terms of research, so this might be these questions for your potential advisor, asking about potential opportunities to publish or present at conferences. I think Siwan mentioned this as well, but also asking where they see their research heading in the next few years. Typically you'll be reading their papers that were published in the past few years, but maybe they're taking a new direction with their research. And it'll be a good opportunity to get a sense of what projects might be available for you to join in the future. And are there opportunities for students to collaborate with other faculty members on research projects? So some programs, you might be just only kind of within your research team or your research lab and focusing your research in that area. And other programs might be more open to collaborating, and you might be able to join other research teams. And so if you're still sort of in the process of finding your research interests, or you have broad interests, and it might be a good opportunity for you to narrow your research interests by joining several research teams. Or maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you have a good sense at this point in your career of like what research you want to do. And so maybe it'll be okay for you to just kind of be within your own research team and working specifically with your advisor. In terms of funding opportunities, so questions around funding and finances can sometimes be can feel a little bit awkward or scary. And so, it's at the same time, it'll be helpful for you to get a sense of what your finances are going to look like for several years. And every program looks different. And so asking some general questions is with faculty is safe, and maybe asking some more broader questions with students might feel safer. So in terms of asking faculty questions around funding, asking what opportunities are available. Maybe you'll be doing teaching or research or clinical work. Are students typically funded at the quarter time or the half time level? And are they fully funded? And for how long is funding guaranteed? So some programs might guarantee funding for 1 year. Other programs might not guarantee any funding. But getting a sense of what your finances might look like might be helpful for you. And then questions for your prospective advisor. Asking what their mentorship style is like. Is it going to be something that's going to be a good fit for your style of working? This is also a question that you can ask their other advisees, asking what it's like to be a student of that advisor. Questions like how often do they meet with their students? Do they hold regular lab meetings? What kind of support do they provide to their students? Those kinds of things will help you get a sense of how well you'll work with that particular faculty member. And sometimes, other programs might kind of share those mentorship responsibilities among several faculty members. And so getting a sense of, what students' experiences are like with other faculty as well. And so kind of moving on to questions to ask students. So, some advice that I have would be to ask multiple students. Every student has a different experience. And so getting multiple perspectives can be really helpful, and kind of finding themes among student experiences. So again, you'll be moving your life for several years. And so getting a sense of what your lifestyle is going to look like over the next several years. So asking things like, what is it like to live in that particular city? What do students do in their free time? Do students have a lot of free time? Do you feel like, you get time off? Those kinds of things. Asking about the culture of the program. Is it kind of a program that you're going to feel really comfortable in, and have the kind of culture that you're looking for? What is a typical day like for a student in the program? Getting a sense of the day-to-day and what you can expect. But also questions about, some of you may be moving with partners or families, and so connecting with students that also have partners or families, and what that was like for them to move with their partners or families. So you might ask questions about what schools are in the area for your children, what supports are in place for students with families. Some universities might have some supports or some supports within the program. And then potential job opportunities for partners. So I know that within our program, we have several partners who are teachers, and it was great, I know, for those students to make connections among themselves, and they can connect with their partners, and can be helpful for finding for jobs. And then also asking questions around what are the strengths and weaknesses of the program that the students see? What are some things that they wish they would have known before entering the program? That can be a really good question, because I think it gives students the opportunity to kind of think back and think about what their life is like now and what would have been helpful to know. Just kind of small details that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. And then again, kind of moving on to finances. Again, sometimes students might feel safer to ask questions around finances. And, sometimes these are questions that can also wait until offers are extended, if that feels more comfortable as well. But sometimes, finding students that you feel really comfortable asking these types of questions with. I know that Colleen actually hosted me when I was applying at Mizzou. And so I felt like I connected with her and felt kind of safe asking questions around this kind of stuff. But some questions like, is it affordable to live in the city on the stipend that is provided to you? Is it common for students to take out loans? Those kinds of questions can be helpful for planning ahead. What other questions do some of the other presenters have that might be helpful for students to ask faculty and students?
Building on the financial piece, a question that I did ask of other students as I was interviewing for doctoral programs, that was on my mind at the time, because this was a somewhat contested issue at the institution I was coming from, was not only the availability of stipends, but also health insurance. We're training in a healthcare field. Having access to good healthcare throughout the duration of our training is really important. But there's variability in the how well supported graduate assistants are in obtaining health insurance waivers across the country. So with other students that I felt comfortable with, as Letitia was sharing, that was a critical question that I was glad that I asked, and that I got different responses on across different institutions, and one I would encourage other students to ask about.
Yes, that's an excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up, Gloria. That is a super important piece of planning for your future. So if there's no other questions from the presenters, I think we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Colleen will be talking to you a little bit about tips for calming nerves.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about tips for calming nerves. I was so nervous for all of my interviews. I remember the first one, I was really nervous, and that's, you know, definitely normal. You're traveling to a new place, you're figuring out a new area. If you're traveling for the interview, you're meeting a lot of new people, and that can be stressful. And you're trying to get in, you know, to a program. So a lot of reasons why this can be a stressful process. So these are just some things that I found helpful, and I'll also ask the other presenters at the end if they have any other tips or suggestions as well, things that help them. So the first one is try not to be too critical of yourself. It can be easy, I know for myself, to kind of get in my head and second guess little things that I said, but really try to remember that you were invited for the interview for a reason, and it means you're already an excellent candidate, and they're really just looking at fit at this point. And so that's fit on their end, but also fit for you, and if it's going to be a good training experience for you. So I tend to kind of think about, oh, did they think I'm a good fit? And did they like me? Do they think I'll be good there? But I've been trying, well, I said I'm on internship interviews right now. I've been trying to flip that and really think about what I'm looking for from a program, and how it would fit with me. Like some of the presenters have said, you're moving to a new area, possibly. You're likely going to be there for you know, a long time, at least a few years, and that is a big commitment for you personally and for your life. So it really needs to be a good place and a good fit for you. So that is really crucial. So trying to flip that and think about how it will fit with your life, instead of thinking about whether or not they seem like they thought you were a good fit. Another tip is try not to compare yourself too much to other applicants. Sometimes some interviews can feel a little competitive, and I know that can be stressful. I remember for my first interview, there was someone there and she seemed so well prepared. She had like so many different things in her purse. She had a change of shoes. She had like everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do not feel prepared. But I don't think that was super helpful for me in that process. And that was kind of my initial impression, but I actually got to talk with her a bit, and I think I ended up seeing her later down the line at a different interview. And so one thing to consider is it can help calm your nerves to try to connect with other people from the program, but also other people who are interviewing, because likely it's a small field, you'll likely cross paths with them again. And it is such a unique process going through these interviews. It's really likely that you have a lot in common with the people that you're interviewing with. I know I've definitely seen people at conferences and things, and they're like, I remember you from that interview day. So feel free to relax and make, you know, kind of small talk if that might help you to calm your nerves a little bit. Everyone has travel stories and things like that about getting caught in the snow or something. So finding ways to make those connections. And also think about, you know, you bring a lot to the table. You have a lot of unique experiences and a really strong background, and you are well qualified for the interview. And so instead of thinking about the other people's experiences, trust that you have a lot to bring to the table and a lot to offer the program that you're interviewing at. So these are just tips from me. Do other presenters have anything that helped them during the interview day, maybe calm some nerves?
I'll mention, I guess, breaks. So usually throughout the day, there'll be several breaks available for you to take. Those are really good times to drink some water, kind of take some space for yourself, take a few deep breaths, and kind of remind yourself of all of the things that Colleen is mentioning. Usually everyone else, they might seem put together, and they are put together, and they're also incredibly nervous as well. So just keeping that in mind, and also just keeping in mind again that you're qualified. So taking those breaks to have some time to have a snack and kind of take some deep breaths to calm your nerves.
I would also like to add a little bit, adding on Letitia's point about taking breaks, like the bathroom. cannot emphasize this enough. If you need a second, like to yourself, where you're not currently fidgeting with your suit or like, you know, wiping your hands on your pants because they keep getting so clammy and sweaty, like go to the bathroom, like take a few deep breaths. I also, and this is just a personal thing, I just like looking at different bathrooms. I rate bathrooms. It's just a thing that I do because I think if you take time to plan a good bathroom, it tells a lot about the type of institution you're going to. But taking that opportunity, also, I had, so being aware of what your nervous tics are and planning ahead for that. So one of my nervous tics is that I like to play with my nails, sometimes bite them if I get very nervous. That does not add to the professional presentation that I wanted to put forward on these interview days. So what I ended up doing was getting gel nails, the ones that are really hard and don't break. So I was like, okay, so I don't have to worry about that. A friend of mine who's currently in my cohort, she said that when she gets nervous, she plays with her hair all the time. So what she did on interview day was put her hair in a bun, like far out of sight, or not out of sight, but just like at the top, out of reach. So she didn't play with it to project that, you know, this sense of confidence and things like that. And I remember like on the day, so a really great mentor of mine who was, I was volunteering in a lab when I was interviewing for programs, and she printed out this letter that her friend had written for her, just kind of like to make her laugh and kind of remember, you know, like, hey, like, this is just academia. Like, you know, like people build these ivory towers and make themselves feel so important, and kind of keeping in mind that kind of helped add like, helps her not take the things too seriously, and same for me, helped me not take things too seriously. I also found myself, I don't know if anyone here are fans of the show Broad City, but there's one character in particular who has this catchphrase. It's called like reduce, reuse, recycle, Rihanna. And like whenever I was getting nervous, I would just write that down in my notebook, and to just, I don't know, it's a stupid show. So like I would think about it, laugh. When you laugh, you have to breathe, and then kind of like get back to like, okay, like who are we talking to now? What are we doing? So yeah, those are some of the things. I was very nervous. Oh, right. I also came down a day early because if y'all remember, the government was shut down this time last year. And I was convinced that the TSA was going to go on strike any day. And I was just like, all right, you guys, I got to plan my flight at least a day earlier. So that way, if they go on strike and my flight never leaves, then I have time to rent a car and drive from New York to Miami to be there for interview day. Very nervous. But everything went smoothly. I got here a day early. I spent a day at the beach over on South Beach. I took money out of my savings for that, mainly because New York was very cold that winter, and I'm from North Carolina and I'm not used to cold. I can't tell you like numbers, degrees, like how cold it was. I just remember being very disrespectful, and that if my skin was outside too long, it would freeze, and I don't like that. So I went to the beach, thawed out for a little bit, and then like came out for the interview stuff. So those are just some things that I did because I was very nervous. So I had to do a lot of things to calm my nerves.
I also took a little bit of time to myself when I was interviewing down here in Columbia. It was right around the time of the inauguration, I think, and there was a protest going on. I'm fairly politically active, and so I took some time to like go out in the community and just be part of the gathering. I was so glad that I did that. It was one of my most sort of memorable and experiences of my whole interview process. I think even if I hadn't chosen Mizzou, it would have just continued to stand out as something that was meaningful in the overall process, which was really stressful, and I was nervous. I think being a couple of interviews in, I realized the importance actually of mantras, one of which Colleen covered, which was, you're already qualified. I remember one of my friends and mentors in Boston said that to me, and it just really stuck, and throughout the process became something that I would come back to. Once I had one interview under my belt, the second sort of thing that I would come back to is, this is a field full of people who really care about other people. That includes me, and they're excited to get to know me. And that was just a really comforting thought to keep in mind over the course of the experience.
Yeah, and that just made me think of, I think in terms of calming nerves, I was really nervous about like being late or getting lost, being on a new campus. And so what I did the day before was like find the building I needed to be at. Where am I going to park? How do I get there? And so took some time beforehand to make sure I knew where I was going instead of the day of kind of feeling frantic and lost. But yeah, I think Lori also made a really excellent point that I meant to bring up earlier, is just that students, the faculty, everyone there is there to help you. And so keeping that in mind, and if you need something, if you need a bathroom break, usually, you need a snack, people are there to support you. And so, keeping that in mind and asking questions, and remembering that not everyone is there to evaluate every little thing you do, but they're there to help and to make you feel comfortable as well.
These are some awesome tips. So I'm keeping them in mind also for internship interviews too. So I'm gonna go on to the next slide talking about after the interview. So I think that's a really good point, that taking care of yourself during the interview day is really important. Remembering to eat, remembering to drink water, remembering to use the restroom, all of that is really important during the interview, and then also the interview as well. It's a really tiring time. Like I said, you're meeting a lot of people, you might be traveling. And so if there are ways after the interview that you can take some time to just to sleep, to rest, recover, especially if you have another one, leaning on your social support can be helpful if there are any things that you can take a step back from during this time, so that you're able to be present at the interview as much as you can. So taking that time after the interview to take care of yourself. Another tip that I have for after the interview is, while it's fresh in your head after the interview day, taking some time to write down some of the positives of the program, maybe some things you still have questions about, or things that, some drawbacks of the program. If you're interviewing at a few places, they might kind of run together. So if you do it while it's fresh in your mind right after the interview, that'll be easy. If you're kind of making a decision between programs, that you have some notes fresh after the interview. So you can take some time to do that. Following up after the interview day, I think it is a good idea to write thank you notes to people that you interviewed with. I don't feel like you have to write thank you notes to every single person that you interacted with, but likely if you're planning to work with a specific advisor, it could be nice to send them a thank you note, follow up. It keeps you fresh in their mind. Also, if you're staying with someone, sending them a note as well is also a nice thing to do, or any students that you'd like to ask further questions. Most students are really happy to talk about their experiences in the program, so keeping in touch with them. I don't know that anyone will be rejected from a program because they didn't send a thank you note, but I do think it's a good idea. And you don't have to send it right away, but the next day, the next week, once you get back, checking in can be a nice thing to do. And then we want to mention handling responses from programs. So you might get a few different things. You might get a no thank you, and if that happens, try not to get too discouraged. There might be a lot of different things that go into that decision. It could be just availability of positions and funding and fit and all of those things. You might hear that you're on the wait list, and so if that's the case, then might be waiting a bit to hear about what the decision will be, kind of based on the other applicants and their decisions too. You may get an offer, which is awesome. So if you get an offer, really want to think about if this is going to be a good fit for you. you might receive multiple offers. And if that's the case, you want to think about trying to make a decision in a timely way, especially if you don't want to hold on to more than two offers at a time. So trying to narrow that down a little bit, that's helpful for the people who may be on the wait list and still waiting to hear. But sometimes you may feel pressure from a program to make a decision before you're ready, and take the time that you need to make that decision. It is a big deal moving to an area. So if you need to take more time to make that decision, then do that. The deadline is in April. I can't remember the exact day when you have to decide by. And so if you're interviewing at multiple places, like I said, you might need some more time to make that decision before you can commit. But again, if you have more than 2 interviews, try to narrow that down if you can. Any other tips for after the interview?
One piece I would add is that once you do accept an offer, sometimes it's the case that, I'll phrase this differently. So there are a variety of ways in which programs will engage you from there. In that kind of spring and summer following the offer. It is your right to be proactive at that stage in gathering information that you might need about particular assistantship assignments, things you need for the logistics of moving. Sometimes in that interim period, it can feel awkward to ask for the things that you need or things you're wondering about. But this is a significant life transition that you're planning, and I would just say it is your right to follow up on those things. And just like on the interview process, it can be a helpful strategy to check in with multiple people. If there's a question that you really need, you feel it's important to begin exploring, but you don't feel comfortable exploring it with your advisor or a faculty member within the program, going to a student, someone who's going to be in your lab, someone you met on interview day, maybe they hosted you, that can be a good first step oftentimes. But being proactive in that initial season after accepting an offer, I do think can be really valuable and is often something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, I'd also add kind of follow up on a couple of things that Colleen mentioned. So keeping in mind that our field is really small, and so sometimes when you get a no thank you or you're declining an offer, just keeping in mind to handle that respectfully. It's not uncommon that you'll run into these faculty member again at conferences or otherwise. And then also, if you have a couple of offers on the table, just keeping, it's just kind of respectful to keep and kind to keep the faculty or the program in the loop about where you're at in the process. So saying, hey, I have, thanks for this offer. I have another interview in the coming weeks, and I'll be in touch with you. So you're kind of not just kind of keeping them in the dark. Some things to think about.
Okay, so I think we can move on to the Q&A, and it looks like we might have some questions here.
Okay, yeah, and that's sort of all from our side. We really encourage you to send in now any questions that you have through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can submit questions anonymously or with your name. We're seeing them as they're rolling in here. All presenters, can you all see these on your end? Okay, I'm seeing nods.
So yeah, I'll start off with a question. If a scenario you get 2 interviews on the same day, how do you handle that situation? And how do you decide which interview to attend and which one to do online?
I can jump in. I think my perspective on that would be is to try to attend the one that you feel like would be the best fit for you, and kind of the one that you want to get the most information about if you're traveling there. I think it does, demonstrate that your interest when you if you're able to travel for the interview. And so I think the one that you feel like would be the best pick of the two would probably be the one to go to. And then if the other program is open to an alternative interview date or an online interview, trying to make that work, it can be a tricky situation to navigate that. But being open and respectful and trying to make the scheduling work. Unfortunately, there's some dates that overlap, and that can be stressful. But yeah, just trying to work it out the best you can.
Awesome, thank you, Colleen. Does anyone have any other inputs? Someone asked if they are staying with students, will they be evaluated during that? Should they be concerned about anything like that? And yeah, during the stay, like when does the interview technically begin?
Right. I can handle this one. So I wouldn't say like, I think it's all properties of being a good house guest. So main thing, it's like, I don't know. I just heard some horror stories. Like one host had 2 students there, and the 2 students decided to hook up on her couch, and it was like, don't do that. So mainly just things having to do with being a good house guest. Also, that person is there to be able to ask questions. Like one question that I felt comfortable asking my host, and not like in any of the interview settings, were like, how much do you pay for rent? And so when I hear the information about the stipend, I want to know, like, how does that work out? Because rent is different everywhere. Yeah, but also being mindful of like being sure to take the opportunities for you. Like I remember the day of the interview, I was like, hey, just want to let you know I'm going to be meditating on your couch for like 10 minutes. And so if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'll be doing that. And then we can leave and go for the place. Being punctual, like if the person wants to leave at a certain time for interview day, just being like, okay, I'll be ready by that time. Also, on the other hand, if they want to get there a little late, you're more than willing to be like, hey, I was curious to know if we could get there a little early. I would feel more comfortable, XYZ. So yeah, and I think also tips of like what to do after the interview, writing a thank you note to your host as well. That's just to be remembered fondly. And also you want to see if you guys get along too, because like you said, these programs tend to be very small and you want to be able to get along with other people. But they're not going to be like evaluating like, oh, this is what she's wearing, or oh, she snores when she sleeps, or oh, I don't know. So don't worry about things like that. I think it's more of just like being conscientious, just being your lovely self. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize it, just using good house guest rules. But you're also going to be in the middle of, an intensive interview process, and it's okay to take time for yourself. If you need to communicate to your student host, like just as Siwan was pointing out, like I'm going to take 10 minutes to meditate. I'm feeling tired this evening. I think I'm going to kind of wind down early. You're host is going to realize that you are under a lot of pressure, and that it's natural to want and need some time to rest. So if you feel the pull to sort of, even when you're in the place that you're staying, kind of be on and be performing, know that that's not expected, that your self-care and ability to have some time to rest are important, and your host's going to recognize that.
Awesome, thank you. Those are good tips. I know your place of rest shouldn't be stressful, so I think those tips would be really helpful if you're staying with a student. I see some questions about research and how detailed your answers and responses to what your potential research might be. So if anyone has any tips on that and how you came up with that and how to align it with the potential faculty that you would be working with.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So I don't think that you, in general, need to know what your dissertation is going to be on. You know, throughout, I think faculty expect and understand that throughout the first few years in the program that you will really be refining your research interest, and it's okay to not know exactly the questions that you want to answer yet. But it is good to know in general, what are your research interests? What kind of questions do you have about that you hope to answer while you're in the program or in the future? And, one way to kind of get at that is to do your research, reading your advisor's work or work from others in the field, and kind of looking at those future directions. Sections of research papers can help you get a sense of like what questions haven't been answered yet that you might want to answer and that you're really interested in, and kind of where the field is moving. So it's good to, kind of generally have a couple of questions that you're interested in, but you don't need to, I think in general, know, all the variables you're going to use or the measures you're going to use. It doesn't need to be very detailed.
This might be also a valuable area to get some perspectives from other students. Working with the potential advisor you might be, you're applying to work with, if it's a program that uses that model. So for instance, if there's a student social that happens early in the process, it can be valuable to make an effort to connect with advisees of the advisor, as we've mentioned so far on the call, and to pose the question, how closely does X expect that our research, including potential dissertation projects, will build on theirs? If the feedback you're receiving is like, this person uses a really tight mentorship model and hopes that the work we'll be doing is very closely aligned with their research line, then that's something to factor into how you answer questions from that faculty member. It's important to be genuine, of course, but if you feel comfortable with a model where work you would be doing would be very tightly aligned, you might think about how to reflect that in your responses. So I think it can vary from person to person.
Thank you. Does anyone have any last minute tips on that and their research and how to talk about it?
I see one person just kind of follow up related to this question. One person asked about how to gain access to manuscripts if they're not available online. And just to answer that real quick, I actually asked the faculty that I was interviewing with if they could send me some of their papers. And they were more than happy to.
Awesome. Thank you, Letitia. I think that's a good point. And I think we're going to wrap up the recorded section and move on to the debrief section, which, to remind everyone, will not be recorded. So if you want to ask other questions that you didn't really want to ask on the recorded part, this is where you can do that, and we'll be more than willing to answer those questions and discuss.
Thanks, Sandra. So with that, I am going to put a stop on the recording. Before we do transition to that, we did want to catch the slide with a couple of additional resources. We'll be sharing this recording on the Division 17 YouTube page. We'll send it out to the SAS listserv. And those will include links to these slides, including these resources, so don't worry about scribbling anything down. But the first is Mitch's uncensored advice for applying to graduate school in psychology. We touched on that a little bit earlier in the presentation. This is Mitchell Prinstein, who is a clinical psychology faculty member, very well established and well respected. He provides a free guide to applying, interviewing, and thinking about offers. It's very detailed. It has some information on counseling psychology that's not entirely accurate, but nonetheless, this is a rich resource and free. So if you'd like to get his perspective, we definitely recommend checking it out. Joe Hammer, at the faculty member in counseling psychology at the University of Kentucky, similarly has been really generous in writing up and recording information for prospective graduate students in the field of counseling psychology and current students who are interested in building their research skills. He has a list of qualities of strong doctoral programs. This isn't a ranking of programs, but more so an overview of what to look for in a strong program. So we have a link to that as well that we'd like to recommend, and through his website you can access additional guides that he's put together. And finally, and we mentioned this on the previous webinar as well, but the Grad Cafe results search is a good resource for finding what interview offers have already been made, the timing of those. So if you're waiting to hear back from any programs and you're curious to know, have other students heard as you plan your logistics, that can be a place to check in. And I think on the next slide, we just have a couple of just an outline of how to stay connected with SAS. We are here for you. SAS is funded on students' membership dues. We have a myriad of resources and hope that you'll consider staying in touch with us so we can continue to be a support through future webinars and in other ways. And at these links are the best places to stay plugged in. So with that, as Sandra described, we're going to be transitioning to the unrecorded part of this call. We have some questions that have been sent in through the Q&A that we still haven't answered. If those are yours, we see them and are excited to get to them. If you haven't sent in any yet, please feel free to put them through to us. So with that, I'm going to turn off the recording. If you are watching the recording, we're going to say goodbye. And if you are live on the call, let's continue the conversation.